today on part 13 of our Grand Cherokee project series. It's finally time to get our winch installed on the front bumper of our Jeep. After sitting on this project for nearly 2 years, my dad and I will go through the relatively simple installation process, wire it up, and of course, test it out. Back in 2014, I purchased my first Jeep ever, which is this, a 1994 Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo. With the big 5.2 liter V8 engine and low miles, this completely stock ZJ was full of potential. Since then, well, we've done a few upgrades and modifications. Past projects include a 3.5-inch lift, transfer case swap, custom roof rack, lights, skid plates, and so much more. We've transformed this stock ZJ into a capable off-road rig and reliable daily driver that's taken us all across Arizona. Today, we continue the project. Okay, so this project has been a long time in the making. Ever since I got my front bumper put on my ZJ, I've wanted to get the bumper finished up with the winch and light install. I ordered this thing back in March of 2018, which was around the same time we finished up part 8 of our ZJ project series, where we got the Hanson front bumper installed. Now, after receiving the winch a couple of weeks later, I realized I would need an additional bracket from Hanson in order to properly mount the roller fair lead onto the front of the winch. I got back in contact with Hanson to order the part. As I mentioned in the last video, Hanson makes some great products, but some of the lead time on their orders can be a bit drawn out. But to their credit, I received the new mount pretty quick this time, and the total turnaround time was about a week. Due to some other projects and issues popping up with the Jeep in the meantime, like the rear bumper install and a fun case of death wobble, this winch project unfortunately got shelved for a little while. But the day has finally come where this is going to get put on the Jeep. So what I ended up with is this, a Smitty built XRC 9,500 pound winch. Now it seems like everyone has a different opinion on brands of winch, so I'm not here to argue with you about that. I got a great deal on the winch, it came with free shipping, and I think for my first ever winch, this isn't a bad call. I've had luck with Smitty built products before, so I figured I'd give them a shot, and I'm anxious to see how this performs if and when I get the chance to use it. The winch comes with a 94-foot steel winch line. I know there are synthetic line options out there, but for the time being, I'll be sticking with all of these stock parts and figuring out how it works from there. I don't want to just immediately jump into switching the winch line without at least first getting an understanding of how this one works. To begin the install, we first laid out all of the components. This of course includes the winch itself, the control box assembly, the actual controller, some additional wiring, the roller fair lead, and the mount from Hanson to pair it to the bumper. The installation itself is pretty straightforward. In fact, much of the instruction manual is just a list of warnings and dangers associated with winching. We got the Jeep pulled in the garage and got to work. The first order of business was to clear off the front bumper where the winch would be mounted. For the last couple of years, this had become the temporary mounting point for my driving lights. We got the lights pulled off, picked off the tape that was holding the wires in place, and got everything cleaned up real nice. Next, we put the winch in place to mock up how everything would mount. Our bracket from Hanson would mount first. Then our winch would mount directly on top of that to the bumper itself. The roller fair lead would then mount to the front of that bracket to allow for proper clearance for the winch line. Once we got the bracket turned the right way, it looked really good. It's amazing how much better a winch looks in this spot compared to the driving lights from before. Almost like it was meant to be. We then pulled the grill out of the way so that we would have some room to work on the wiring later on. With everything in place, we installed the 4 bolts that would attach the winch directly to the bumper. Once everything looked like it was leveled off, we tightened those bolts down. From there, it was time to mount the rollers on the front. We pulled the winch line out a little bit and proceeded to mount the fair lead to the winch mount bracket. After eyeballing it to make sure it looked nice and level, we then tightened that up as well. The next step was to work on the wiring. We started with the control box assembly, which needed a little bit of TLC before final installation. The controller box actually showed up slightly cracked, which either came from the factory that way or was damaged during the shipping process. This wasn't a huge deal though. We pulled the box apart and slapped some silicone sealant on the inside to patch it up and got it put back together right. The nice part about mounting the box is that there are multiple ways you can mount it to the winch. You can mount it either directly on top of the winch cable or off to the side, more out of the way. I opted to go with the side mount. This required adding on a small bracket onto the side of the winch in order to hold the control box. After that was done, we got the box securely mounted on the winch. To get everything working properly, we would need to hook up 5 different cables. A main power wire and a ground wire runs from the battery to the control box. From there, 3 additional shorter cables connect the control box to the winch unit. The main power wire easily connected to our positive terminal, coming off our battery isolator from the dual battery install. The ground cable, however, required a bit more creativity. After eventually getting the right headlight assembly pulled out, we were able to directly route and tuck the cable underneath everything. One of the problems with the V8 Grand Cherokee is that there just isn't much room to work. After eventually getting everything hooked up and properly secured, we were ready to reassemble and test out the winch. We put the grill back in place and got the headlights remounted. After installing the clevis hook on the end of the cable, we plugged the winch controller in and gave it a test. We used the controller to pull out a bit of winch line. If you're going to pull out a lot of cable, it is best to disengage the clutch and free pull the line out in order to avoid overheating the winch motor. For this test though, we would only be pulling out around 15 foot of line. We winched the line back in and everything seemed to be operating like it should. The last step was to figure out where to mount the driving lights. Luckily, the fair lead mount had a few different holes that would allow us to mount the lights in a variety of positions. We set the lights upright, then tried them upside down, but I'm curious to know what you guys have done with your lights and your winch. Personally, I really like the look of them mounted on top because they fill the hole between the brush guard and the winch perfectly, and they also stay out of the way of the winch line when you're using it. We decided to mount them in this position at least for now. I'm not opposed to moving them around or getting a different style of lights in the future, but I wanted to give this a shot at least for now. And that is basically it. The installation was really easy and straightforward, and I am really happy to finally have the winch mounted onto the Jeep. It's one of those things that looks really good on the front bumper, fills in that gap really well, but more importantly, it is a great tool to have in the event that I, or someone else that I come across, should ever need it. I don't plan on getting in too many situations where I need to use it or depend on it, but it's certainly something I would rather have with me, just in case. I've been in a few situations in the past where it probably would have come in handy and made things a little bit easier. And there is certainly a lot more to learn about using the winch. I am by no means an expert on anything winching, but I'm excited to play around with it and learn all of the proper techniques. Until I come across a situation where I actually need to use it, I'll be playing around with it here at home and doing some routine maintenance checks on it. According to the instruction manual, it is advised to pull the winch out about 50 feet at least once a month, and then spool it back up in order to ensure that the motor and everything else remains functional. I do have some other winching accessories that I want to play around with, such as a snatch block, so I'll be experimenting with that and some different techniques in a future video. But for now, that is it for the winch install. I'm glad we finally got it done, and I am anxious for future trips going forward to have this tool in the arsenal. As always, thank you for watching this video, and we'll see you on the next one.